Okay, it's the Molly's show. Welcome to Riska. Riska Molly brings NCAPER Molly to talk about disaster preparedness and emergency response. Take it away, NCAPER Molly.
Great. Thank you, Riska Molly. It's so nice to be here and to talk with you and your folks about something that, as we record this on October 17th, I think is pretty top of mind to everyone, especially in the eastern part of the US. But this is really an opportunity to share with y'all some kind of ideas and concepts as you're working in the field, whether you're an artist or an arts organization, ways that you can just be a little bit more prepared for different types of crises and to help your community. So we're just going to run through these slides and I'll have my contact information at the end. Feel free to reach out to me at any point with questions or thoughts. What we're going to do today is I'll introduce a little bit about myself and my organization, kind of frame the idea of crisis readiness in the context of what you all are doing each day on the ground. Have a little bit of discussion and share some follow-up resources and information with you. Just a little bit of background. My name's Molly Quinlan Hayes. I am the Fund Development and Program Officer with NCAPER, the National Coalition for Arts Preparedness and Emergency Response. I have been with NCAPER unofficially as part of as part of the steering committee since 2008 and on the staff since 2022. I'll just note I also wear a second hat, which is I manage artist emergency grants for the New York Foundation for the Arts, a national program to help artists in distress. So first of all, kind of why is this even a thing for us to talk about? This slide just looks at the last 50 years and a variety of things that have happened. And this is not a comprehensive calendar, but it points out the ways that the arts and culture community has kind of shifted and responded, sometimes reactively and sometimes proactively, to respond to changes and unexpected interruptions from the world at large. And we'll start in 1972. And this is a story usually told by my executive director, Janet Newcomb, who was at that time in Corning, New York, when Hurricane Agnes hit. This was a very unexpected flooding incident and totally inundated the inland small communities of Corning and Elmira, New York. The reason that we put this at the front is that it was a stark contrast in the way that two communities responded to a disaster event. In Corning, which is the home of Corning Glass, the local community leadership really took leadership. They worked with FEMA immediately. They helped to employ all of the people who had suddenly lost their jobs in the downtown because the restaurants were closed and the shops were closed and the schools were closed, helped to pay for debris cleanup and getting things restarted. And they actually used the silver lining of a crisis, and often there is a silver lining, to take their vision that they had had of a new culturally oriented Main Street, making it more than men's shoe stores and diners, into something that now is kind of a crown jewel in that part of the state as a tourist attraction and just an arts community that is wonderful to live in. Down the road in Elmira, those steps were not taken. They did not have the infrastructure, they did not have the vision. And even 52 years later, you can see signs that that community never fully recovered. So that's just kind of the bookend. Moving through, you can see that in 1995, HENTUP was formed, the Heritage Emergency National Task Force. This is a partnership of FEMA and the Smithsonian that's really focused on protecting and conserving the nation's heritage. So historic structures, archives, libraries, kind of the cultural heritage part of our family. Move forward, obviously, in 1999 was the Columbine High School shooting. And one of my first, I was in Arizona at the time, and really saw from my next door neighbors do incredible response, bringing artists into Columbine to work with the students and faculty that were affected in one of the first instances of kind of trauma informed creative response. 9/11, in the wake of the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center, the Lower Manhattan Cultural Center again kind of took the lead, that went up to the table and said the arts and culture need to be such a player in the revisioning and the healing of our community. And I think you see it from the Tower of Light monument all the way through the incredible health and vibrancy that exists with the arts community in that part of Manhattan today. 2005, Katrina and Rita hit the Gulf Coast, and in the wake of that devastation, there were such obvious gaps in the response system that artists and arts organizations fell through. They were displaced. They didn't have access to the kind of what FEMA could legally provide in terms of relief and response that the commercial side and employed individuals did. So at that time, NCAPER was created, really to come together and build a better national safety net for the arts. So it's a voluntary coalition that I'll talk more about what we have been doing in the 20 years since. You can follow through if those of you who've been in the field for a while, you've unfortunately felt the pain of the Great Recession in 2008. But the ARPA, the arts community, did kind of push back, and we're got 50 million in direct relief through the National Endowment for the Arts, through the ARPA, the ERA, American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Superstorm Sandy, you can move forward, but each of these events really had a specific policy or practice shift in the arts community. In 2017, our very close partners at Performing Arts Readiness launched, and this is a program that was funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to really look at the fact that while HENTEF and all of our friends in the arts and culture and libraries and museum side were kind of ahead of the curve, the arts, particularly the performing arts, which are more ephemeral, more time-based, really, we didn't have our act together as much in terms of protecting our assets, protecting our work. And performing arts are so vulnerable because when a rehearsal or class or a performance is interrupted, that can never be repeated. We just lose that time, we lose that engagement, we lose that experience, and we lose that revenue. So Performing Arts Readiness really is working to take the lessons learned from the cultural side of the sector and moving them over and translating that into performing arts readiness. And what we've really found is that we've learned together. The cultural heritage sector has learned as much from the art sector as we have from them. So it's really become a wonderful array of resources and relationships that have been developed. Moving forward, you can see in 2020, the pandemic, followed by 2021, just a number of really unexpected and sadly increasing types of weather events in all parts of the country. And I think one thing that we have learned since Katrina and Rita is that natural disasters are not location-based. They can happen anywhere in the country, and they can happen at any time of year. Riska, Molly, and I were just talking about the unfortunate emergence now of another potential hurricane, and here it is almost Halloween, which is not the norm. So just moving forward to where we are today. But what I want to say is that the good news is that we now have an entire kind of emerging professional discipline around this work. We are learning and can share now what to do ahead of time, what to do when you're in the midst of an unexpected event, and what to do after, so that you can not only recover, but you can actually build back better. And so there have been a lot of successes and a lot of new innovations along the way. One of the most exciting of which is that you'll see the final thing on our timeline here. In 2024, FEMA, under the Biden-Harris administration, implemented two significant waves of reforms to the Federal Emergency Management Agency around access and equity. One of those is something that NCAPER and our dear partners at Craft Emergency Relief Fund had been advocating for since Katrina and Rita, which is that self-employed artists and other entrepreneurs are now able to apply for FEMA assistance when their tools of their trade are lost or damaged in a disaster. So now if you are a professional guitarist or a photographer or a dancer or a media artist, you can now, if your equipment and supplies are lost in a presidentially declared disaster, you can now request funding. And when Tuesday, we heard about the first Western North Carolina artist who was successful in getting their application approved. So it's come full circle, a lot of work, but we're happy about that. I am going to move on to just describe a little bit about this infrastructure that I've described that has kind of developed. And we all work as much as we can in concert to kind of fill in the gaps and not duplicate our work. So this is just a little kind of the gears that are working behind the scenes in partnerships for readiness, response, and recovery. You'll see NCAPER there. Our primary job is advocacy and networking. We call ourselves a network of networks, such as working with our wonderful partners in the state arts agency field. We work in concert with Craft Emergency Relief Fund, which is a national amazing organization. They focus their financial grants for artists to get ready and to recover after disaster are limited to craft artists, but so many of their planning tools and resources are relevant and available to studio and individual artists of all disciplines. So if you're not familiar with them, and they're almost all free and for the having at their website, craftemergency.org. As I mentioned, performing arts readiness has a huge slew of incredible faculty doing webinars, which are both live and recorded, so you can watch them at your leisure. A lot of case studies and sample plans and articles, just really fabulous resources. They've also funded, I think it's something like 50 different entities and communities, either to develop their own individual readiness plans, to develop networks so that before a disaster, there's a network and a communication system worked out so that you can immediately jump into action. And also circuit riders who are trained experts who can work in a region, work with a number of different organizations to get ready. So we're all working in concert. And again, we work very closely with HENTEP, the Heritage Emergency National Task Force. One of their amazing resources is they have a hotline of national heritage responders, so that if you are a theater group or museum or a choreographer and you have materials, maybe it's costumes or textiles or papers or digital information, and that has been damaged in a fire or a flood or mud, you can call them and they have free experts 24/7 who can help you with salvage. So it's amazing infrastructure behind the curtain that you should know about. Okay, we're going to get into some on-the-ground stuff, but first, just a little bit more description. Again, NCAPER, we're a voluntary task force of national, regional, state, and local arts organizations, again, formed in 2006. And we really, again, work with education, advocacy, training, and networking. These are our current steering committee members. They range from the federal, the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Assembly for State Arts Agencies, grant makers in the arts, and then an array, and Americans for the Arts, which was one of our actually co-founders. And we have a number of organizations who have a specific interest in supporting either artists in specific disciplines or regions, such as the National Performance Network, South Arts, Music Cares, the Entertainment Community Fund, and the New York Foundation for the Arts. These are just some of our resources, and these are all available for free on our website. The Arts Organizations at a Crossroads Toolkit was created during COVID, but it's designed to be kind of evergreen. Its subtitle is Managing Transitions and Preserving Assets. And we found that a lot of particularly smaller and mid-sized nonprofits can sometimes get to a decision point when they need to think about where they're moving forward, what the path is, and they're not sure where to take that, or they really can't afford the expertise. So we put together this toolkit that helps you if you're looking at a legal change, maybe you're looking at merging with another organization, or during COVID, organizations were thinking, should I just kind of, formally suspend my operations for a while? What does that mean with the IRS, with my donors? It also looks at if you're having a leadership transition. So many organizations, if you lose a key leader, all of their knowledge and their relationships and their deep smarts are gone. So this really looks at a way of how do you build that, how to mine some of that and how to document some of that in a gentle and a respectful way, so that you capture all the things that that person has brought to the organization, and that's not all left lost when they leave. It also has some really great, easy ways to go about archiving and preserving your organization's history. You don't need to wait until you're thinking about closing or a founder is retiring to start protecting your history and your heritage. So it gives you some easy ways to go about that. Next up, we have the Arts Field Guide to Federal Disaster Relief, which is available in both English and Spanish. If you are an artist or arts organization in a disaster zone, FEMA is not the only thing that can help you. There are actually 28 different, and that's not counting the new FEMA artist funding, 28 different federal programs that may, from the Department of Agriculture, Department of the Interior, the Small Business Administration. There are a ton of them. And what we have done is we have brought them and interpreted them and pulled out what's relevant for the artists and arts organizations and how to easily kind of navigate all of these federal mazes. And there are other kind of keystone document is the Cultural Placekeeping Guide, which is a response to all of the wonderful investments made in the last few decades around cultural placemaking and saying, okay, that's great, but now you want to protect that investment. You need to steward those wonderful places and objects and people that you have created that are so special in your place. And here are tools to build a network and a system to make sure that those special places are saved and safe. A couple of things that are the key activities that an NCAPER does. Response calls. This is kind of our core thing that we would do no matter what. After a crisis of any scale, we offer to host these Zooms for those who are affected to connect, to share what's going on, to talk with each other, and to talk with us and our steering committee and our partners about what's going on so we can connect them with resources. This Tuesday, we had our second weekly call with those affected by Hurricane Helene. And it's really been, it's an emotional thing to do, but it's also a very practical thing to do. For some of those on the calls who don't have much internet or phone, it's a way for them to literally talk to their colleagues that they haven't been able to reach otherwise. They can get a sense of what's going on in their region. But then we are able to immediately connect them with, we have folks with FEMA on the calls. We have folks from Performing Arts Readiness on the calls. We have resources so that they can immediately get guidance and not have to create their response process from the get-go. So we did those after Harvey. We only had to do like 5 of them and they were off and running. In Maui, we did 9 months of calls and had amazing, we had funders bring in resources after the calls. We had a new collaborations developed. And then after Hurricane Maria, we had over a year of calls in Puerto Rico and separately a year of calls with U.S. Virgin Islands. Our newest development are state and local activation teams, so that if when a disaster happens, that there is again an in-state network already developed between funders, the art service organizations, and leaders, so that again, response can happen right away. And finally, and I'm going to pause for a minute here and talk about our CAM program, which was Gamali is a member of our crisis analysis and mitigation coach program, which is our work to develop a national network of people who are trained in the arts, but to work with the community and with emergency management personnel so that they all know each other and can respond more cohesively, and also to get ahead of the curve and to develop mitigation strategies for communities. So I might pause here and ask Riska Molly if you would talk a little bit about Pam and your role in that.
Well, I was in the pilot year, so it was pretty fun. We were just even figuring out what it was. And some of the things that I took away from it that were really useful and I think really important to my community here in Rhode Island is that I now can speak a little bit of the language of emergency preparedness and disaster management because that's one of the first things I learned was, wow, it's very hierarchical and there's a lot of language that we don't understand. There's so many, I mean, we talk about acronyms in the arts. No, it's, um, so that was really helpful. It enables me to be a translator and a connector between emergency management folks and our arts folks here in Rhode Island. So working with the state agency as well. Now that we're just starting to work with the state agency at RISCA, the emergency management agency, um, and then connecting with folks from all over the country. The other thing I'll say is that the group does a couple of days of really intense all day trainings together. And during one of those trainings, the river that I live next to flooded for the first time since I had moved there in 5 years. So I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, this is super timely and important that I'm doing this because we're seeing an increase in things we need to prepare for and things we need to respond to. And the need for community connections to exist before the disaster is so key. And I think I have a lot of friends who live in North Carolina. There's a huge arts community in Asheville. So I'm just seeing all of these social media posts when people get internet about checking on each other and artists who know artists who are making sure everybody's okay. So the development of community and a plan is so clear to me because of that program.
Lovely. Thank you. And thank you for participating in CAM. And I think that one of the um, messages I hope that you will take away from today is that yes, scary things happen, but if we think about them and prepare for them, they can be less scary, they can be less damaging. And I have found actually that counterintuitively working in this space gives me peace of mind because you kind of take the scary things out of your brain that might happen and you actually say them out loud. You talk to them around a table with people and you come up with some ways you're going to respond. And that actually is very empowering and makes it less scary. So thank you. Okay, back to our slides. So as I mentioned, Briska Mali is part of our national network. By the end of this year, we will have 35 certified camp coaches in 22 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. And it's great that we have 8 of those are working with state arts councils and 2 in regional arts organizations. So really kind of building that web to help and support each other. So now we're going to pivot into what this actually means in a day, in your day-to-day life. So I'm going to share some definitions here with you and then some kind of steps and actions that you might be able to take to help you and your community be more ready. So here are some of the definitions that I use that make sense to me. One is readiness. What even do we mean by that? I think of readiness as being in a posture to be resilient and prepared for whatever crisis emergency may arise. So, kind of being aware, being what's the word, kind of situation aware, and having some muscles already built up so that I'm going to be ready to step into what comes my way. Mitigation is the process of identifying your potential risks and figuring out how to reduce or eliminate them. You can't eliminate any of them, but you can figure out what your biggest risks are, right? If you are in a low-lying area, it's probably water. If you are on the coast, it's probably storms and wind. If you are a ballet company, it's probably, that you want to make sure that your Nutcracker performances and that ticket income is protected as much as possible. So just that thought process. And then the end result hopefully will be, whether you're an individual or an entity, a readiness plan. What is that? It's the results of an intentional decision-making process about what you're going to do and who will do it if something happens. What's your plan B? Don't think about it in the moment, because when you're in a crisis, your brain is only operating at about 50% of its regular capacity. So it's not a great time to be making really important decisions. You want to be making them ahead of time. And people need to know what their job is, whether it's your studio assistant, your board president, your HR director, yourself. You need to know what your role is. So just a little bit about kind of the environment that we are all living and operating in. When you think about crises, they can be either human caused or natural. They can be accidental or intentional. So, accidents could be a hard drive meltdown, which just happened to me. It could be, a chemical spill. But they're also intentional. We were just talking about the PPSD having a data ransomware. People are making mischief these days, and you need to protect yourself from that. Then there are the forecast events. Usually these are big storms that are coming in that you kind of know are coming your way, but also the unseen things, the things that come in from left field. So as you think about the things that might be happening in your space, just kind of keep these various types of crises in mind. And as Riskamali said, the emergency management is a whole discipline unto itself. They have their processes just as we have ours. But this is kind of the circle that they work in and that we encourage you to think through in your own operations. Starting with, preparedness at the top. So again, that's kind of thinking ahead of time. What are you going to do if something happens? Obviously, if your power is out, you want to have, some bottled water, some snacks, and, a way to, a power bank to get your phone charged and all of that. Response is in the immediate hours and days after an event. If it's a small accident, this whole cycle might take an hour if you have, say, a slip and fall at your venue, right? You respond to it, you help the person, you do up the incident report, you get them to their car and you clean up the dangerous area and you're done. In a large scale disaster, this whole wheel can take, weeks or months or even years. So you prepare, then the event happens, and there's some sort of immediate response, life, safety, and security. Relief is the next stage, and this is really getting people safe, food, shelter, power, connection, community. Recovery is the long-term, the rebuilding. And this is where we often find that the arts can be so critical, because they can both help in the recovery in terms of arts and culture are so important in community rebuilding in terms of morale and spirit and creative thinking. But also, the arts should be at the table to be a key part of the recovery funds and rebuilding and make sure that we are not left out of the planning. And then the final step is the mitigation, which is kind of afterwards, you do a little debrief and you say, okay, what just happened? How did we respond? Did we do it well or poorly or in the middle? What were we at? How were we damaged? What could we shore up and mitigate so that the next time we're in a better and healthier and safer position? So that's kind of the emergency management wheel. At this point, I am actually going to move forward to some thoughts about how you might actually do some of this planning yourself, because it can seem like a big thing to bite into. Um, but if you think about it, really, a crisis of any kind cuts you off from a critical resource or function. It might be and so these are some critical functions that I see in most artistic practices and artistic organizations. There's some sort of programming. You have events, you have sales, you're making work, you have classes, whatever the programming might be, exhibits. Your people, it could be just you, but it is also volunteers, artistic associates, board members. Your facilities, this is whether they're facilities administrative, rehearsal studios, storage facilities, or programmatic facilities, whether you rent them, own them, or borrow them. They might be in your home, they might be offsite. IT and data, all of your information management is a critical thing that if you're cut off from, you're kind of lost. Your communications. Um, uh, I think that's another thing that we are seeing in Western North Carolina. There are people that literally the world knew what happened and they didn't because they were cut off from communications. So knowing how you're going to respond if your standard daily communications are cut off in some way, are there other ways that you can get and receive get and give information? Your finances, that can be cash flow, insurance, revenue, access to banking, online banking, all of that. Your assets, collections, and inventory. For performing arts, that can be a little bit more intangible, but it is just as important and just as critical. So, recordings, archives, all of the elements it takes you to put on performances, sketches and background and history, corporate records, all of that is important. And then your community. You are strongest when you have and are part of a community and a network. That's really what CAM, the Crisis Analysis and Mitigation Coaches, understands, is that if you are connected to your community, you are much more likely to survive and thrive after a crisis. So this is kind of a way to think about you're not just subject to physical threats from natural events, right? There's so many other kinds of things that might impact you, and it might cut you off for a short time or a long time, but getting access to a critical function to keep your operations going is important. So how are you going to come up with a backup plan? The other kind of mantras that I have in this work, I have two of them. One is start where you are. You probably already just intuitively have things in place. You just might not have thought of them as part of your readiness plan. The other is there's no guilt. Wherever you are today is fine. Please don't worry about what you should have, could have done. That's not important. We're here today and we're going to go forward with where we are today. So again, what is readiness planning? It's doing some intentional decision making ahead of time about what you'll do, how you'll do it, and who's going to do it. So here are just a couple of readiness planning steps. One is to list your assets. Two is to assess your practices, risks, and vulnerabilities. Three, protect those assets and minimize your risks, doing that mitigation. And then the last is to create your readiness plan. So I'm just going to talk briefly about ways you might do that, but then I also am going to put in a plug for the fact that you don't have to do this by yourself and you don't have to make it all up from scratch. Part of NCAPER's core belief is that sadly, there have been other people who have been through down this road before, whether it's a data loss or a studio flood, they have learned the lessons. So we have been working to harvest wisdom from people who've been through it to create tools that we can offer to you. One of those tools is today's workshop. Another is Arts Ready, which is an online planning tool really developed for small and mid-sized arts organizations that helps you do all of this online and poses these questions so you don't have to figure it out yourself. At the end of the webinar, I'll share some information about that tool, but at artsready.org, you can see it for yourself. And we actually have, thanks to the Mellon Foundation, a number of free subscriptions available. So feel free to be in touch with us and we will set you up with a free subscription if you'd like to use that tool. But here's something that you can just do in your own office or in your own studio. List your assets, your physical space, and what are your physical items in that space? Records, objects, equipment, supplies. List all of your events. What are the festivals, fairs, tours, productions, exhibits, classes, all of the things that are part of your operating assets. And then what are your relationships? Whether it's with donors, board members, volunteers, staff members, vendors, collectors, all of the people around you that help to make what you do happen. Those are your relationships. So you can literally just sit down as an exercise and list these things. Step 2 is to look at your practice or your organization's risks and vulnerabilities. So this can be in another column. What are your highest risks? There are things that are going to be specific to your location. There are things that are going to be risky because of maybe their high value. Again, I mentioned the Nutcracker, just because that is such a reliable and necessary moneymaker for so many dance organizations. It might be your annual gala. It might be, a specific festival that you go and sell your work at. What are the things that are highest risk? Or it might be because things are their medium makes them high risk. So if you have, for instance, one-of-a-kind paper documents, those are highest risk. Those are the things you might want to prioritize for digitization. If you have things that are on a portable hard drive that's 8 years old, like I did, you might want to go back that up in the cloud, which I didn't. And because that's a very, kind of fragile medium, things that are aging. So just think about the things that might need your prioritized attention. We also recommend that you think about all hazards planning. This is the idea that if you are an arts organization, it's really inefficient to think about a fire plan and a flood plan and a tornado plan and an embezzlement plan and a heart attack of our artistic director plan and a data hack plan. What you want to think about is, okay, going back to these critical functions, which are if I were interrupted from one of them for any reason, right? So if suddenly my artistic director is unavailable to me because their mother-in-law got sick and they have to go out of town. They have a heart attack. They suddenly decide that they need to find themselves and they go off to Europe for the summer. Doesn't matter. Your artistic director is suddenly, you don't have access to them. How are you going to, what's your plan B? So that's the idea of all hazards planning. And the other is to remember that there are slow emergencies that we can recognize now, and the fact that they're slow doesn't mean that we should not be planning for them. Gentrification and cost of living, economic downturns, which we know happen even though we don't know when, the obvious emergency of climate change and its impact on our work and our lives, the potential emergence of another public health emergency. So you have your assets, you have your risks and vulnerabilities. Now, how do you look at those together to protect your assets and minimize your risks? Look at all of your assets in step one and your risks and figure out where are the disconnects and where are the priorities for me to take some action. Here are some obvious ones that I would encourage you to peruse. Making sure that your paper and digital records are redundant. The best practice is to have 3 copies of important information in 2 different formats and in 2 different locations. So for instance, my main contact list of all my important people, I have it on my computer, I have it in my Google Drive, I have a hard copy at home, and I have a hard copy in my glove compartment in my car. So if I have to jump out of my house, I know that I have that with me. So think about that redundancy. Documenting your physical assets for any kind of replacement, whether it's from insurance or FEMA. If you need to do fundraising after disaster, you want to be able to show the before. So this can be a physical inventory. It's good to have the age and costs of things. But if nothing else, just take your smartphone and go around your space and document everything visually, what you have and that you had it and this was its condition. Make sure that your insurance and fiscal health are up to speed. Do you have proper insurance? Don't be afraid of talking to an insurance agent. Some people say, oh, if I bring them in and they'll know I'm not doing this and I'm not doing that. They are there to help you. They are there. They want you to minimize your risk. So use them to your advantage. And also think about what your fiscal health is in terms of some reserves, putting aside a little bit each month into an emergency or reserves fund, having a little cash stash that you lock away, not to grab, when the pizza guy comes, but it is there in your bag so that if all of a sudden the power goes out and there aren't ATMs, you've got a couple $100 stashed that you have if you need it. If you are an organization, you want to make sure that your insurance and fiscal health includes things like having multiple signatories, making sure that one or more people, that more than one person has access to your online banking, that your employees can still get paid if you suddenly have to shut down the office or operations for a time. Making sure that your board treasurer has access to the information that they should. Your digital health, again, making sure that you are protecting your information and your equipment from harm. When you have, say you have a new employee start, do you make sure that they understand that they might be subject to scams and phishing? They should go through training to make sure that your digital health is protected. Making sure that you have multiple people who can access your drives, restart your servers if you still have in-house servers. Making sure that you have a plan to upgrade your equipment over time. Computers now are built to become obsolete in 3 to 5 years. So, just making sure that you are kind of following some best practices when it comes to your digital health. The last agency that I worked with, I literally said to people, if I can go in and I can open your computer with password 123, you're getting a black mark. Change your passwords regularly. Just those little things. Knowing what your emergency and disaster options are. If you rent space for performances, say, what happens if there is a leak in the roof and they decide to cancel your performance? What rights do you have? If you are an artist and you have a contract and it has a force majeure clause in it, an act of God, do you know what that means? Do you know what your rights are? Have you negotiated that so that you don't end up, losing everything if something happens because the presenter has to cancel an event? So understanding all of your options and your rights and obligations there. And finally, thinking about your power and communications backups. Technology is pretty inexpensive these days, so making sure that you have uninterrupted power sources so that if the power goes out, your equipment doesn't fry and you can still run for a couple of hours. Having some power banks, loaded up and ready to go. These are all things that don't take a lot of time and energy. They just take a little bit of thought. Okay, so we've gone through these steps. You've listed your assets. You've assessed your risks and vulnerabilities. You've kind of come up with your mitigation plan. Now you want to kind of not only write everything down, but make sure that people know what their job is as well. So, what's your communications plan? How will you be in touch with people and how will they be in touch with you? What are your physical and digital go bags? If you suddenly have to evacuate, you want to have stuff ready to go, literally in a box or bag or backpack or a watertight tote from Target, but something where you can take your most important items and have them ready to go with you. You ready? You might need to shelter in place. Last month in Kentucky, there was, a criminal on the loose, and during the hunt for that person, people were asked to shelter in place. You can't, leave home. Do you have enough supplies, water, food, power, in your space that if you were suddenly having to shelter in place, you'd be safe there for a little while? What's your shutdown plan? If you need to leave your studio or your facility, how do you safely shut down electronics, secure all of your data, lock up, deal with emergency equipment and security in a way that it'll be safe until you're able to come back and reopen? If you work on the road, if you're a touring artist, what is your readiness on the road? Do you have important things with you? Do you know how to get in touch with the community or the festival or the venue you're going next? Do you have emergency contact information for them? Again, I mentioned protecting your legacy. You all are creating and stewarding one of a kind, unique experiences and things and ideas. And you deserve and should protect that for the benefit of the rest of us. So this is not a throwaway thing. Documenting your work, your history, preserving that is really important. Again, training yourself and others. We all remember those fire drills we had when we were a kid, and you had your buddy, and you made sure that they were out of the room. And then there was somebody who made sure that everybody else was out before they closed the door behind them. You should have that in the spaces that you are working and operating in now. And lastly, I would encourage you to commit to annual updates. Give yourself an emergency holiday. It could be in September, that's National Readiness Month. It could be May Day, which is May 1. But just give yourself a time when every year you're just going to go through all this, update it, think about things that have changed, assets that you might have acquired, people that have changed that might need to be trained, and make sure that you keep this alive and going for yourself. Because again, you have to put on your oxygen mask first. You have to take care of yourself so that then you can take care of others and continue to be part of your creative community. So these are some planning resources that are available to you. Again, Craft Emergency Relief Fund has Studio Protector and Artist Career resources that really work for craft and visual artists. NCAPER has a one page on our site for performing and literary artists. dplanartsready.org is the online planning resource for arts organizations. And the New York Foundation for the Arts has published in the last 2 years, as part of National Preparedness Month, an actual blog that goes into concepts like this in a deeper way. So if you'd like to dig in more, that's an option for you as well. We also have a number of their recovery resources out there. I hope that you will never need these, but if you do, please know that these exist. They continue to be improved and expanded on, and ncaper.org is where we try to house links to all of these critical recovery resources. So I'm going to pause there and see if Riska Molly has any questions or the observations that she would like to add or would like me to address.
So one thing I will say is that we do coming up on October 28th at noon. Cameron from Craft Emergency Relief Fund will be joining me for another webinar specific to artists about emergency preparedness and business insurance. So that one will really be about getting your stuff ready and getting yourself ready and protecting yourself. So I strongly encourage you to come to that one. Cameron is wonderful and in addition to being a really compelling presenter, he also lives in North Carolina and runs emergency relief grants for our Craft Emergency Relief Fund. So he's really in the thick of it right now, but is a great presenter. So I hope you'll come to that. Um, and if you are working on your personal emergency kit and you don't know where to start, let me know because when I made mine, I made a spreadsheet plus Amazon links. So I have all of that written down if you want a sort of more Rhode Island specific, ready to shelter in place or leave because the river next to your apartment flooded. Let me know. I have that. I have a link to a spreadsheet.
Christina Wisdom. Thank you. Well, here again is just another pitch, so that again you don't have to create this from scratch. Access the Studio Protector, which is a service resource for individual artists, and Arts Ready, the resource for arts organizations. Would love to give you a free subscription to that. And I want to share my contact information with you. Happy to be on call if you have any questions, can point you to any resources, and to encourage you and in the important work that you do. Thank you for what you do and really appreciate you taking a little bit of time to think about protecting it with NCAPER. And thanks to Rhode Island State Council on the Arts for having us.